The heavy Mont Blanc pen hovered just an inch above the dotted line when the facility director excused herself to answer a sudden knock at the door. Left alone in the mahogany-paneled office of Golden Pines, I sighed, massaging my stiff, aching knuckles. The air in the room smelled of expensive leather and forced lemon-scented cleanliness. I idly flipped back a page on the thick stack of admission contracts, just to double-check the monthly breakdown my son Mark had so generously offered to subsidize. But the page stuck to another. A pale yellow carbon copy slipped beneath a heavy rider clause. It was titled Confidential Subsidization Agreement. I scanned the dense legal jargon, my eyes finally catching the sprawling, jagged signature at the bottom. My blood ran completely cold. The room seemed to tilt beneath my chair. I am Eleanor. I am 71 years old, a widow for nearly a decade. And until this exact second, I believed my only child, Mark, was finally stepping up to care for me in my twilight years. We'd had a strained relationship since he married, but I thought this was his olive branch. I stared at the black ink again, tracing those familiar aggressive loops. It wasn't Mark's name quietly backing this luxurious five-star facility. It was Richard Vance, the man who had driven my late husband's construction firm into bankruptcy, embezzled our savings, and vanished without a trace 25 years ago. Richard Vance was secretly funding my peaceful retirement. My fingers trembled so badly I dropped the pen. Why, and how on earth was Mark connected to the man who put his father in an early grave? The heavy oak door suddenly clicked open behind me, and Mark's smooth, impatient voice broke the silence. "Mom, you haven't signed yet? I just need a moment to read this over, Mark," I replied, my voice miraculously steady. I casually flipped the yellow carbon copy back beneath the stack of admission papers before turning to face him. He hovered in the doorway, his smile tight, his eyes darting immediately to the discarded pen on the desk. This suffocating, impatient presence was exactly how it had all started 3 months ago. Before autumn, Mark and I spoke only on major holidays, a hurried call on Christmas, a generic text on Mother's Day. He was always too busy closing real estate deals in the city to visit his aging mother. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, his silver Mercedes abruptly pulled into my cracked asphalt driveway. He walked in unannounced, not bothering to ask about my arthritis or my garden. Instead, he immediately began pacing my living room, his sharp eyes scrutinizing the faint water stain on the ceiling and testing the slight slope of the vintage floorboards. "I don't live like this anymore, Mom. It's not safe," he had declared, pouring himself a measure of scotch from my late husband's crystal decanter. It hadn't felt like the tender concern of a loving son. It felt like a cold, calculated appraisal. Glossy brochures for luxury retirement communities began arriving the very next week, with Golden Pines always strategically placed at the top of the pile. He relentlessly insisted it was time to liquidate the house and secure my comfort. I had assumed it was belated guilt driving him, but remembering that first afternoon now, I recalled the heavy scraping noises coming from beneath my floorboards while I was in the kitchen brewing tea. He hadn't just been inspecting the foundation. Mark had been searching for something down in my late husband's basement. The memory of those basement scraping noises chilled me as I looked at Mark's expectant face. I should have trusted my instincts during our very first tour of Golden Pines last month. It hadn't just been beautiful. It had been flawlessly engineered to disarm me. The admissions director, the same woman who had just stepped out of the office, had led us through the pristine manicured grounds. "We pride ourselves on personalized care, Eleanor," she had purred. "It started in the conservatory. I have cultivated rare heirloom African violets for 40 years, a quiet hobby Mark always dismissed as an old woman's waste of time. Yet, the facility's conservatory had an entire climate-controlled bench, dedicated exclusively to my specific obscure varieties. Then came the library. Nestled on the main display table was a beautifully curated section of mid-century architectural history books. My late husband, Arthur, had been a brilliant architect before his firm was stolen from under him. The final trap was the resident workshop in the East Wing, equipped with the exact model of the vintage wood lathe Arthur had cherished. At the time I had actually wept. I thought Mark had finally paid attention to who we were. I thought he had spent months meticulously researching to give me a perfect sanctuary. But staring at his impatient, cold eyes now, I realized the terrifying truth. Mark didn't know the names of my violets. Mark didn't know Arthur's preferred brand of lathe. Mark had never paid attention to us at all. The flawless tour wasn't a testament to my son's love. It was a psychological cage built by someone who knew Arthur and me intimately. Someone who knew exactly what bait to use to lure me out of my house. To get me out of the house, they needed me to believe I could no longer live there alone. It started 2 weeks after that flawless tour. I was sitting in my armchair, knitting in the quiet of the evening, when I heard heavy, deliberate footsteps echoing from the attic. Arthur and I had built that house. I knew the sound of the settling timbers and the wind in the eaves. These were boots. I called the police, but they found nothing, just undisturbed dust and stacked boxes. Mark rushed over the next morning, playing the role of the deeply concerned son to perfection. "Mom, you're imagining things," he had said gently, laying a heavy hand on my shoulder. "It's the isolation. It's playing tricks on your mind." I fought him on it, insisting I was fine, until the keys went missing. First, the spare set to the back door vanished from the hook by the fridge. Then, the small brass key to Arthur's antique roll-top desk disappeared from my bedside table. I tore the house apart looking for them. I began to doubt my own memory. Was I slipping? Was age finally catching up to me? The final straw was waking up to find the front door standing wide open in the dead of winter, snow drifting into the front hallway. I was terrified. When Mark arrived, he didn't even look surprised. He just handed me a coat and whispered, "It's time, Mom. Golden Pines has a room ready today." I had surrendered, convinced I was a danger to myself. Now, looking at Mark's polished shoes in the director's office, I realized my home hadn't been haunted by my failing memory. It had been breached. The pieces were snapping together with sickening speed. I should have listened to Martha. Just last week, during a trial luncheon in the Golden Pines dining room, Mark had stepped away to take a business call. I was quietly sipping my tepid Earl Grey when a frail, liver-spotted hand suddenly clamped down on my wrist. I jumped, turning to see Martha Higgins. She used to live 3 doors down from us in the late 80s, back when Arthur's firm was bleeding money and Richard Vance was a regular dinner guest. I hadn't seen her in over 20 years. She looked like a brittle ghost, her silver hair thinning, her shoulders hunched, but her eyes were wide and frantic. "Eleanor," she had hissed, her gaze darting nervously toward the polished staff hovering by the kitchen doors. Her nails dug into my skin. "You cannot stay here, Martha. It's been so long. Are you—" "Listen to me," she interrupted, her voice a reedy, desperate tremor. "It's not a retirement home, Eleanor. It's a waiting room. He owns it. He owns all of us until he gets what he's looking for." Before I could ask who she meant, a smiling orderly materialized behind her wheelchair. His hands gripped the handles with a white-knuckled force that contradicted his pleasant grin. "Time for your afternoon walk, Mrs. Higgins," he said smoothly, abruptly rolling her away as she stared back at me in silent terror. I had chalked it up to dementia. I had actually felt a patronizing wave of pity for her fading mind. Now, staring at Richard Vance's signature on the hidden contract, Martha's warning rang in my ears like a death knell. Mark wasn't just moving me into a facility, he was delivering me into a vault. The echo of Martha's frantic voice until he gets what he's looking for finally made sense of the chaos from last weekend. Mark had practically invaded my home with a small army of movers to begin the downsizing process. I had wanted to take my time, to gently wrap the fragile remnants of Arthur's life. But Mark was a man possessed. He had insisted on packing Arthur's study himself. Dust and mold, Mom, he had lied smoothly, blocking the doorway with his broad shoulders. Let the professionals handle the heavy lifting. But when I had sneaked downstairs after midnight to salvage a few photo albums, I noticed the chilling discrepancies. The objectively valuable things, my grandmother's sterling silver tea set, the vintage pearl necklace in my vanity, were completely untouched. Yet, the false bottom in Arthur's antique roll-top desk had been violently pried open and stripped bare. The heavy leather-bound ledgers from 1988, the exact year Arthur's firm collapsed and Richard Vance vanished, were gone. Arthur had kept them hidden for decades, paranoid that someone would eventually come looking for the missing offshore accounts. Even the old brass safe in the floorboards, Hidden beneath the Persian rug lay agape and empty. Mark hadn't been clearing out my house to prepare it for the real estate market. He had been tearing it apart to find the financial records Arthur meticulously kept to prove Vance's embezzlement. And whatever Mark found or didn't find was the exact reason I was now sitting in this mahogany office, staring at a contract that would legally trap me under Vance's control. The chilling emptiness of that safe had kept me awake 3 nights ago, pacing the dark hallways of my home while Mark slept heavily in his old childhood bedroom. He had carelessly left his sleek tablet charging on the kitchen island. I had never been a snooping mother, but the cold, undeniable dread settling in my chest demanded answers. My hands shook as I tapped the glass screen. The passcode prompt appeared on a dark whim. I typed in the year Arthur's firm collapsed, 1988. It unlocked instantly. It was a sickening testament to Mark's twisted obsession with the past. His email inbox was open, the screen glaring brightly in the shadows. The most recent thread was with a sender simply labeled RV. The house is practically gutted, Mark had written earlier that evening. I secured the physical ledgers from the desk, but the offshore account keys aren't here. Are you absolutely sure the old man kept them? The reply from RV Richard Vance chilled me to the absolute bone. He had them, kid. Stop stalling. Get your mother to sign the Golden Pines admission tomorrow. The subclause triggers a full medical power of attorney. Once she's declared incompetent, we legally strip the rest of the estate and tear the drywall down if we have to. I had stood completely paralyzed in my dark kitchen, the harsh blue light of the tablet illuminating my tear-stained face. My own son, my only child, had sold me out to the phantom who had destroyed his father, all to scavenge whatever remaining wealth Arthur had desperately managed to hide. The harsh glare of the tablet screen faded from my mind, replaced by the sterile lemon-scented reality of the director's office. Mark was still standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the unsigned contracts resting on the mahogany desk. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, but decades of hiding my anxiety from his father's creditors had taught me how to wear a mask of absolute calm. I just need a moment to read this over, Mark, I repeated, my voice raspy. I forced a dry, rattling cough into my fist, leaning heavily against the desk. Actually, my throat is terribly parched. Could you be a dear and fetch me a cup of water from the fountain in the hall? He let out a sharp, irritated sigh, clearly frustrated by the delay. Fine. Give me a second. The moment his polished shoes retreated down the corridor, I moved with a speed I didn't know my arthritic joints still possessed. I snatched my smartphone from my leather purse and flipped past the yellow carbon copy to the deeper pages of the hidden file. My hands shook as I tapped the screen, but I managed to mute the camera's shutter sound just in time. Click, click, click. I photographed every page of the confidential subsidization agreement. The documents outlined a terrifying systematic transfer of my assets. There were schedules listing Arthur's remaining patents, the exact coordinates of our old safety deposit boxes, and property deeds I hadn't seen in 30 years. I flipped to the final addendum. The heavy tread of Mark's footsteps echoed right outside the door. I shoved the phone deep into my purse and smoothed the contract just as the brass doorknob began to turn. Mark pushed the door open, handing me a flimsy paper cup of water. Here, drink up, and let's get this done. The movers are waiting for my signal. I took a slow sip, letting the cool water soothe my genuinely parched throat. My eyes dropped back to the top page of the standard admission form, the one I was supposed to sign. Through my camera lens just moments ago, I had captured the venomous fine print buried deep in Addendum B. It wasn't just a financial handover, it was a complete surrender of my personhood. The clause explicitly stated that by accepting their subsidized care, I was granting Golden Pines management, and by extension, Richard Vance, durable medical and financial power of attorney, the moment their in-house physician deemed me cognitively vulnerable. And who would be the one to report my sudden tragic decline? My loving son. Martha's frantic warning echoed again, a waiting room. Once I signed that dotted line, I would be swiftly moved from this sunny mahogany office straight into a locked memory care wing. They would medicate me, silence me, and tear my beloved home down to the studs, looking for Arthur's offshore keys, all while I withered away under Vance's thumb. Mark wasn't just stealing my estate, he was stealing the rest of my life. A cold crystalline clarity washed over me. The terrified trembling in my arthritic hands suddenly stopped. I set the paper cup down on the edge of the desk with a quiet, deliberate tap. "You know, Mark," I said softly, picking up the heavy Mont Blanc pen and rolling it slowly between my fingers. "Your father always warned me about signing things I didn't fully understand." "Dad was just paranoid, Mom," Mark scoffed, checking his silver watch for the third time. "Just sign the paper so we can get you settled. The movers are charging by the hour." I didn't lower the Mont Blanc pen to the dotted line. Instead, I carefully capped it and set it down on the center of the mahogany desk. I reached into my leather purse, bypassing my phone, and withdrew a thick manila envelope I had been carrying for 3 days, ever since my midnight discovery in the dark kitchen. I slid it across the polished wood until it tapped against his knuckles. Mark frowned, his impatience finally faltering. "What is this?" "My counteroffer," I said, my voice eerily steady. "Inside are hard copies of your email thread with RV. There is also a receipt from my attorney, time-stamped yesterday morning, confirming the creation of a blind trust. It contains all the offshore funds your father hid. You and Richard were looking in the wrong safe, Mark." His arrogant posture shattered completely. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified little boy as he stared at the envelope. "You thought you could lock me in a gilded cage and strip the copper from the walls," I said softly, standing up and smoothing my wool skirt. "I survived Richard Vance once, Mark. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize his shadow?" The facility director pushed the door open, beaming brightly. "Are we all set, Eleanor? I'm afraid there's been a change of plans," I said, looping my purse over my shoulder. My son was just leaving. I walked out of Golden Pines, the heavy oak front doors closing behind me with a definitive hollow thud. I never looked back at Mark, who remained frozen in that lemon-scented office, his treacherous plan crumbling into ash. Within an hour, my attorney had formally revoked Mark's access to all my accounts and filed a restraining order against my own flesh and blood. The authorities, armed with the photographs of the hidden subsidization agreement and the damning emails, opened a quiet but aggressive investigation into Richard Vance's shadow ownership of the facility. I recently heard Martha Higgins was safely relocated by her niece, far away from that terrible waiting room. My house is quiet again. The hired movers were sent away, and the vintage floorboards now only creak when I walk across them. Sitting in Arthur's study, looking at the empty space where his beloved roll-top desk was violated, the grief finally catches up to me. It is a profound, suffocating sorrow. You spend your entire life nurturing a child, pouring every ounce of unconditional love and protection into their bones, only to realize you cannot control the man they choose to become. Mark chose greed. He chose to align with the very monster who broke his father's heart and stole our youth. I had spent decades trying to protect my son from the harsh, ugly realities of what Vance did to our family. In the end, the cruelest twist of fate was that I had to protect my family's legacy from my son. It is a heavy, unnatural burden to bear in my twilight years. But as I water my rare African violets in the morning sun, breathing in the scent of damp earth and home, I feel a deep, abiding peace. I am still here. I am still sharp. And some secrets, no matter how deeply they are buried, will always find the light.